This episode of Analog Resurgence brought to you by Skillshare. Stick around after the video to learn more. Kodak, film, black and white, how to get picture off film. These are just a handful of search terms that I googled before making today's video, which is about T-Max, one of Kodak's black and white films that is available in multiple formats, including 35mm and medium format. And that is what we're talking about today. Kodak's two black and white film stocks are Tri-X and T-Max, and T-Max is kind of like a companion piece or an alternative to Tri-X a lot of the time. It was introduced in the late 1980s by Kodak, so it is like a film name that has been around for a while. But it was reformatted in 2007 to have T-grain. So for anybody who doesn't know, T-grain refers to the shape of the silver halide crystals on the film that make the film light sensitive. T stands for tabular, and they're a different shape in comparison to more traditional film stocks which have a more square grain to them. T-grain is meant to be able to give you a finer grain at higher ISOs in comparison to more traditional films. It's also something that can allow for sharper images and somewhat of a more modern look to them in comparison to things like Tri-X and HP5. It can be a big debate, and there are definitely people out there who have like a huge opinion on all of this stuff, but that's basically what it is, and it comes down a lot of the time to personal preference, what is cheapest, most available, and also kind of if you care and how you want your images to look. But again, as I always say in these videos, just understanding like the basic characteristics of a film stock can go a long way in helping you to understand what's worth your money and your time and what you want to shoot, and maybe shoot more of in the future. Kodak has T-Max available in 100, 400, and 3200 ISO, and by comparison, Tri-X is only available in the classic 400 ISO option. So this video specifically is just looking at T-Max 400, which of course is constantly compared to Tri-X 400 because they're the same ISO, they're both by Kodak, so what's the difference? And of course, the difference does come down to like the grain structure and everything, but also some different little characteristics. So let's take a look at some of the scans I got off of this roll. I bought a 24 exposure roll. You can also get 36 exposures when you're shooting it in 35. I also shot a medium format roll in the Mamiya Universal. This stuff was developed by yours truly in Kodak HC110 and scanned by myself as well on an Epson V700 here at home. And if anybody is interested in just being able to check out the images on their own, then everything, of course, is available over on the Patreon. I think I was expecting to be not super impressed by T-Max 400, especially because it's always compared to Tri-X. And I do like Tri-X, and Tri-X is like a, great classic looking, contrasty black and white film. But T-Max definitely gave me some clean and fine-grained results with the shots that I got from my rolls. I think one of the big things here, besides the whole grain structure, T-grain thing, is that it has a pretty moderate contrast to it, whereas in my experience, you do tend to see a higher contrast on Tri-X. T-Max does kind of have like a more modern feel to it. Not to like strictly compare it to digital, of course, because everything is still so different, but it does have like a crisp, kind of cleaner look to it that is a little more reminiscent of like shooting black and white digitally, whereas Tri-X has, the grain of a classic kind of black and white film that a lot of people kind of associate with shooting black and white. T-Max just doesn't have a super pronounced grain a lot of the time, and in the end that just kind of comes down to how you want your shots to look. Side by side, Tri-X comes in heavier with that grain, and it is more noticeable. And again, like I'm talking about the classic kind of film look to it, and that is what probably a lot of people getting into film and like experimenting and learning more about shooting film for the first time are looking for in a black and white film. Like there's a lot of like, ooh, I want that retro, vintage, like chunkier black and white grain. If I'm shooting film, I want it to look like film. I do really like Tri-X, and I think the more pronounced grain and heightened contrast to it does make it one of the defining black and white films, but T-Max is still a solid choice that offers a look that differs just a bit. T-Max does differ primarily in the grain against things like Kentmere 400 and HP5, and a lot of those things have more in common with Tri-X for like specifically the grain stuff. It's not something that is drastically different in the realm of black and white, like higher contrast and super fine grain stuff like P30 from Ferrania and like Ilford's Ortho Plus, which is an orthochromatic film, or Japan Camera Hunter Street Pan, which is like super crunchy, contrasty to the max. But T-Max's subtle differences do separate it from Tri-X and HP5, which is something to consider if you've passed it over for those films, and because you can also get it in 400, which is the same speed as those ones. I think if I were to recommend T-Max, it would be to beginners as something that is pretty flexible and maybe unfairly takes a back seat to Tri-X. It also maybe eases you into shooting black and white so that you're still getting like a grain and like an image that isn't like too contrasty and too grainy. And if you're not looking specifically for like those heavier features, T-Max is something to kind of stick to. So really, how grainy do you want your shots? Because there's such a variety within the 400 ISO black and white lineup that you can decide if you want like the subtler grain with a medium contrast, or a higher grain with a deeper contrast, or like a really punchy grain with a harsh dramatic look. Things are also looking good in medium format. Like it doesn't have like a drastically different experience than shooting 35. But again, in medium format, because the frame is so large, and with T-Max the grain is like smaller and finer and meant to be like sharper, you do get some really, really solid looking shots with this stuff. I do want to know people's like stance on Tri-X versus T-Max and the whole T-grain film, and you know, exactly like when people choose T-Max over Tri-X. I feel like maybe a lot of the time T-Max 400 specifically takes a huge backseat to Tri-X, because like 400 ISO is the ISO that is dominated by like HP5 and Tri-X, whereas T-Max seems to kind of be like invading on those films just like a little bit. So T-Max 100 definitely seems like something that is more able to stand on its own and not unfairly like compared to a lot of things. There's also T-Max P3200, which is technically like an 800, 1600 ISO film that is really flexible and good for being able to push process to have a higher ISO in the developing stage. So yes, what sort of like criteria do you stack your 400 films up against when you're deciding what to shoot, and what does it come down to a lot of the time for you specifically? In the end, I'm pretty positive about most film stocks in general, because there's such a wide variety, and it's worth checking out like the different choices from Kodak, but also like Ilford and Rollei and Agfa, all that wonderful stuff, Fomapan. So it's probably worth just picking up rolls of this stuff and understanding the characteristics and exactly how they play into like what you want to shoot and your own work and your own preferences. And hopefully understanding some of the characteristics of this stuff will help you to decide like what you want to shoot as you're getting more and more into film. Or if you're really into film for a long time, maybe it's gonna inspire you to take a second look at something that you had like ignored. In conclusion, I think T-Max does stand on its own even in 400, even when people are comparing it to HP5 and Tri-X and like those big names. T-Max does still have something to offer in regards to stacking it up against those that is slightly different enough that it can still be worth picking up. Big thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video today. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. It's curated specifically for learning, and there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. And hey, it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. For my videos, I'm always using things like Adobe Photoshop and After Effects and Premiere Pro and stuff that I'm definitely not gonna teach people how to use because that is so different from the content that I make. But you can learn in depth about stuff like that over on Skillshare. For myself, I've been going through a bit of an Adobe Lightroom Fundamentals course by Lotus Carroll just to finally get like years of film scans properly organized to make all of this easier to figure out. So the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description of this video will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Thank you all so much for watching. Click the subscribe button if you haven't, the thumbs up and give it a like. Comment, and again, let me know, black and white, your thoughts on all this stuff. Yeah, all the links and stuff in the description. And of course, I will see you all soon.